So you've had a good year so far, whether you're a business owner, you're an employee, a freelancer, and you're making a little bit of money. But the question you're asking yourself is, what do I do with all this excess cash? You know that the Fed's printing money like crazy, inflation rates are going up. Should you go into crypto, real estate, stocks? And what I wish someone told me just a few years ago is that first you need to understand the basics of wealth building, the foundations of investments and money management. Now, what I'm about to show you is a clip that I did for a group of people when they asked me, which is the number one question I get is, Ravi, how are you investing your money, or how should I be allocating my funds as I'm receiving them from my employer or from my business or as a freelancer? And this will shock you. I'm going to include some books that I personally recommend that I've used to create an 8-figure investment portfolio over the past few years, as well as some number one myths that people make around money management, money managers, and how just a few percentage points wrong could cost you your entire retirement. This is going to be one for the books, ladies and gentlemen. This is something that I have been asked for numerous times, and I just had not created yet because, well, really, I wanted to make sure I did it really well. So this is going to be how to build generational wealth. This is investing. This is, if you're watching this, you're most likely inside of the initiative. You're probably making more money than you know what to do with, and it's probably time to start putting some of that money to work for you. And I'm going to go a pretty comprehensive guide on everything I know about investing, tax savings, all of that. Here are a few caveats. Number one, this is not meant to be a consulting or advice or anything like that. This is just my totally unprofessional opinions. I'm biased. I'm not that smart. So it's not going to be extensive. It's not going to cover every single thing you can ever imagine. It is definitely going to be informational for sure, but I am not a financial advisor. I'm not a fiduciary. I'm not a lawyer, and this is not advice, okay? I'm simply showing you what I have or done or what I continue to do. Please consult a professional. I could lose it all tomorrow. Who knows? I could be the dumbest person, I most likely am, in the world when it comes to investing. So do not take this as advice. This is just some crazy guy who was able to buy a t-shirt that has company name on it. Okay, that being said, now that we have that out of the way, resources. Okay, so these are some incredible books that I've read on finance, on investments, that kind of stuff. So number one, Snowball, which is the biography of Warren Buffett. That is an incredible book. You know, he would leverage so much money. Every single dollar that he made, he would put back into investments, that he literally lived in like a really shitty house. He didn't give any money to his kids. And I'm not saying you have to live like that, but it's really interesting to see what one of the most wealthy men in the world, how he grew up, what his life was like, you know, how we got into investing, all that stuff. So it's a doozy. I think it's like 1,200 pages. It's definitely a deep book, but I almost read it cover to cover. I mean, it was like very, very well written. I think it was written by like Alice Schroeder or something like that. Number two is going to be Unshakable. That is by Tony Robbins. That is the shorter version of his longer book, which is Money Master the Game. Great book. Money Master the Game is a really, really long one. So it's a shorter version, a more condensed version of his longer book, which is Money Master the Game. But this one is incredible. This is really what started opening my eyes into some of the things I'm going to tell you here in a little bit about, you know, what people tell you about using money managers and what that can really mean for your future. So that's another great book. Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I'm sure a lot of people in here have read this, but I'm not going to make any assumptions. Robert Kiyosaki, he pretty much talks about the cash flow quadrant, you know, people that are professionals, essentially, people that own businesses, people that are investors, and then people that have big businesses. So that's another really great book on investing. The Richest Man in Babylon. These next two, The Richest Man in Babylon and The Millionaire Next Door, both really great books. Take them with a grain of salt. You know, like, they're going to talk about saving your way to success and saving your way to wealth, and how like the typical person, you know, the millionaire next door is like your average day person who, you know, doesn't have a nice car, doesn't have this, and they just save their way to success. So both really great books to get foundations down. I don't necessarily agree with all of it. That's kind of like the Dave Ramsey school of thought. And this doesn't partake to a lot of people watching this, or at least it doesn't partake to me, because, you know, I'm not making $5,000 a month trying to become a millionaire, or making close to $1 million a month. So just understand the difference in that stuff. This is written for the sheeps, the general population, but it's still really great books. Profit First. This is an incredible book by Mike Mishkalowicz. I can't pronounce his last name, but that really talks about like how to start segmenting the money you have coming in, going to taxes, going to OPEX, operating expenses. But one of the things he talks about is most businesses, they take money into the business and then they put all the money immediately back out of the business without taking any profit for themselves. And he talks about taking a small percentage, whether it's 1%, 3%, 5%, 10%, and setting aside to actually have a business that's producing you money, right? So it's actually kind of a little bit opposite to the Millionaire Next Door, Richest Man in Babylon, in the sense that he's saying like, hey, business should be so that you can enjoy life a little bit, like, or it's just a job. So make sure that you are taking a little bit of money to yourself first, treating yourself, going on vacations, whatever else it is. But it's also a great book on finance and how to pretty much manage money inside of a business. The next one's going to be I Will Teach You to Be Rich by Ramit Sethi. Great book, great business as well. His website is awesome. His SEO is incredible. Yeah, awesome. Both an awesome guy and a great book. This is going to be more like really foundations of money, really, right? He talks about inside of there, like, you know, budgeting, and he talks about if it's okay if you want to have $1,000 dinner out with your friends, but that just means you need to live in not as nice of a place. And so he doesn't really prescribe to this whole like don't buy Starbucks ever, but it's also like, hey, you should be budgeting your money correctly. Talks about credit cards, you know, credit score, that kind of stuff as well. So that's another really great book on that. And then this is an excellent book on taxes, which we'll talk to at the end of it. I'm not a tax advisor, but this is a tax advisor, and this is really killer. His name is Tom Wheelwright. He is the financial advisor or CPA to Robert Kiyosaki here. So Robert Kiyosaki does a forward inside of this, which I think was just so that they could, you know, sell more books. But it's a really incredible book, and he does talk about a bunch of different ways that you can have kind of tax savings. So those are some resources. I'd recommend honestly getting all of those. Spend some time learning about finances, because you're learning how to build a business and make a lot of money, but the real trick is keeping your money. And these are how you're going to keep it and multiply it. Okay. So let's talk about in investing the very simple concept, which most people don't understand, and that is risk versus reward. All right. So everything in my life boils down to this simple concept, right? Risk versus reward. What is a risk I'm willing to take for that reward? So let me give you some examples. Starting a business is very risky, right? You could go under, you could lose all the money, you could lose investors' money, you could lose employees' jobs, whatever it is. But the reward is an incredibly fulfilling life. You make millions of dollars, et cetera, right? So to me, that risk versus reward is worth it to take that risk, okay? Another example, doing a backflip on a snowboard, very risky. All right, so you could fucking break your arms, you could break your legs, you could break your back. I know people that have done that. You know, if I broke both my wrists, I couldn't work for a while, I couldn't type for a while. And the reward is what? Like your friends or the girl you're with thinks you're cool, or you take a cool video. Like I just went snowboarding a little bit ago in Telluride, and most of the trails were closed because there wasn't that much snow. So all we had was the terrain park, and everyone was like, do a backflip, and I did jump on some of them, but I didn't go crazy because I'm like, guys, I'm not a professional snowboarder here. I'm a businessman, and if I break my arms, I break my back, what is all of it for? So it seems like I'm exaggerating a little bit. All of the decisions I make in my life are simply what is a risk on this and what is a reward. And I'm a risk taker. Trust me, I wouldn't have been where I am if I was a risk taker, but it's taking smart risks, right? Let's talk about another type of risk. You go to the bar, you go to have a networking event, you have a few drinks, and then you're like, okay, I can drive home. I'm safe to drive home. Let's talk about the risk reward. Reward of driving home after you've had a few drinks is your car is there when you wake up in the morning, and you have your car at home pretty much, and you save $10, maybe $12 on an Uber home. Okay, let's talk about the risk. You kill somebody, you destroy your car, you get pulled over for a DUI. All of those things are minimum 10, potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars, not $10,000. And, you know, obviously it affects your life, other people's lives, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why I don't do any of that stuff, because it's like, why does that make any sense? Okay. Now, obviously people do it because they're under the influence, but just understand that. So I treat my investments the same. Depending on where I am in life, I am willing to take more or less risk, right? So right now I invest in cryptocurrency because even though it's very risky, although I don't think it's crazy risky, but although it's very risky, I'm young, right? I'm 26 years old at the filming this video, and I can make all the money back in a year or so, okay? You know, I run a successful business. I have the skills that I could make it all back. But I think it's like, in my opinion, it's getting in like on internet before the internet was really big. It's getting on some of these companies before it was really big. So the reward could be a 10 to maybe even 100 times return on my investment, okay? So that is worth, the risk reward there is worth it to me, okay? But if I was like 50 plus years old and I was coming closer to the side of retirement, then maybe I wouldn't be so bullish on it. Maybe I wouldn't be investing so heavily in it because I'm like, at this point, I just want to preserve the wealth I have. I'm not even trying to make more money at that point, okay? So it depends on where you are in life, in business, in your age, you know, if you have a family, whatever else it is, okay? So let's understand the basics when it comes to investing, all right? In my opinion, not professional, the best investment you can make is always in yourself and in your business. This is where I invested 100% of my profits for the first 2 years in business. I didn't even think about stocks. I didn't even think about real estate. I didn't want it to take any time or energy, right? This could be masterminds, employees, equipment, advertising, publicity, you know, anything really that can get you an ROI inside your business. Because if you really think about it, most investments, a great investment gets you a 10% return on investment a year, right? Some of the things we're building inside of Scaling with Systems are getting you a 300%, 500%, 1000% return on investment in a month, right? I mean, you have some businesses that are getting 100,000% return on investment in 1 year. Okay, you're never going to get that in any other investment. So it's important to invest back in your business in the very beginning. Okay, most companies fail because they don't do that. They're taking the money out and they're trying to put it into investments, or they're trying to put it into cars or women or mansions or men or whatever your taste is. And so that doesn't succeed. That's why investing in this mastermind was a good idea. Continuing to invest in things like this is a good idea. I invest all the time into like SEO guys or publicity, whatever it is, that doesn't even work out, but it's worth the risk reward. $1,500 for an SEO guy, okay, for 1 month, the risk of that is worth the reward to me, okay? So understand that, in my opinion, that's the best investment you can make in the very beginning, and that's where I put most of my money in the very beginning. However, it was actually the point that I had $1 million after taxes cash in my bank account, where my roommate at the time, Jeff, was like, he like works in finance, and he's like, dude, you're the dumbest person I know. This is losing, I'll talk in a little bit, but it's losing like 30, 40 grand a year. But I was just so focused on, that was what I was good at, and I didn't want to get distracted by other things, okay? So at some point though, you're gonna have too much cash to simply invest in your business. And this is when I started investing elsewhere. So, you know, once I had $1 million cash sitting in my bank account after taxes, it's like, even if I put this $1 million cash and just threw it into ads, everything would break. Like, I couldn't technically do that. My back end couldn't handle it. My sales team couldn't handle it, and it wouldn't make any sense. And most of the things, if you're running this business here, most of your guys' businesses aren't really like OPEX, operating expenses, or CapEx, capital expense heavy. So most of you won't like, you'll be cash flow positive every single month. So you don't need a whole lot of cash laying around. And I'm going to get into a little bit about why it'll depreciate, but it's really important for you to understand that. Okay. So at some point you're going to have too much money that your business is making you that it's just going to sit in cash. And so in order to get rich, you're going to start a business, right? Or you're going to get a really highly lucrative paying job, like a salesperson job or something like that, where you're making quite a bit of money, $8,000, $10,000, $15,000 a month, something like that. Okay. However, in my unprofessional opinion, in order to get extremely wealthy, you have to have your money make you more money. Okay, and we're gonna get into that in a little bit. But so in order to get rich, you start a business, or you're making 6 figures a year. That can get you rich, or hood rich, as some of my friends say. However, in order to get extremely wealthy, that money that you're making has to go to work for you, okay? And on top of that, if you do decide, hey, I don't wanna invest whatever it is, this is what I did, and you keep your money sitting in cash, it will be losing 3 to 8% a year through inflation. Some people think that because the US economy printed 21% of all money supply in the past year, that it could be even higher than 8%. But let's just say we put it at 4% inflation. If you have $1 million in cash, every single year, you're just losing 40 grand to it. You could even buy some nice things that you could buy some nice jewelry. You could go on some pretty kick-ass vacations for 40 grand a year, but instead it's just losing its purchasing power through inflation. So a lot of the times, even some of these investments will just be hedges against losing your purchasing power, okay? So in order to understand this concept more, you have to understand compound interest. So I just wanna pull up this really quickly, and let's talk about the power of compound interest. This is arguably the 8th wonder of the world, and I really didn't understand in the beginning, but most of you watching this are likely relatively younger, okay? I'm not gonna make the assumption that everyone's here is super young, but most people I know that I work with are in their 20s, in their 30s, maybe early 40s. So if you're like 25 years old and you start investing even just a little bit right now, you have the most powerful thing in the world on your side, which is time, which most people don't think about. And so and there's a bunch of stats and studies that show that, like, even if you started today and invested $80,000 over the next 10 years and then stopped, in 40 years, you would still have more money than the person who waited 10 years and then invested $80,000, $100,000, and only had 30 years to invest, right? So the really most powerful thing here is time, and you need to understand that whenever you're investing. But let's just give you an example here, okay? So let's say you're watching this right now and you have $20,000 to put into, let's just say, the S&P 500, some kind of investment here, okay? $20,000 is the initial investment. Every single month, you're just gonna put $2,000 more into it, okay? And then, you know, let's just say you're 25 years old, so you're gonna do that for about 40 years, okay? The S&P 500 in the United States, on average, has returned right around 11% since its inception every single year on average, which is like the best investment you can make in my totally unprofessional opinion. But let's account for inflation. Let's just say it's around 8%, okay, to count for inflation. There's not gonna be any variances, and then it's gonna compound annually. So let's calculate what this is. So this means in 40 years, you will have $6.6 million, and you have only put it in about $1 million into the investment, okay? So without doing anything else other than just putting $2,000 in a month, starting with $20,000, in 40 years, you'll have $6.5 million. And what's even more powerful is at that point, about every year, it looks like you're making, so I'm going from 6.13 to 6.65. So you're making right around $500,000 a year just through interest, just through dividends. So at 65, I could decide to stop investing and I could just take $500,000 out every single year and never even touch this 6.65 million, okay? I'm pretty sure everyone here could live on $500,000 a year. So that is the power of compound interest. It's like the slide edge. It's everything that I teach inside of Scaling with Systems, and it's everything I live my life by. Now, for me personally, one of the first things, and I'll show you this in a little bit, that I learned when I started playing with this, and I recommend you guys go to this website and play with these numbers a little bit, was that if I could just get $3 million and I could get it inside of like the S&P 500, and I could let it sit there for 40 years, I could have $65 million right here. Okay. And then let's say that we aren't so conservative with our estimated interest rate. Let's say it's actually 9%. So let's say inflation is about 3% a year, 3 to 4% a year. Then let's say it's instead of 8% interest rate, it's 9% interest rate. Then if we do the same $3 million in 40 years, you'll have almost $100 million, okay? And if you did nothing else in your life, if you just worked and fucking hustled as hard as you can to get $3 million and then just put it into, you know, the S&P 500 or something generating you that amount of money, then you could have about $100 million in 40 years doing nothing else. And then from the year to year, you're pretty much doing, so this is 86 and this is 94. Year to year, you're getting about $8 million in interest every single year at that point. You think you can live off $8 million every single year? I think so. Okay. So for me, for the longest time, I was like, let me just get $3 million into, you know, the S&P 500. And then if all else fails, I'll at least have this working for me. All right. So that's the power of compound interest. Okay. So let me wrap this up here with just a few other thoughts. Investments itself shouldn't be too much of a distraction. You're not a day trader. This is a long-term investor. Okay. I do not think anybody here should be trying to game the system. I don't think anybody here should be focusing 4 hours, 5 hours a day, staring at the news, staring at the stock market, staring at all this stuff. Your time is still, at this point, for most of you, is still better spent making more money than investing. And that's why I talk about the things I'm going to talk about in these videos are going to be long-term investment strategies. Okay. Things that you put it in there and you hodl, you hold on for dear life. You just don't touch anything else. You go out about your day. You almost act like that money's not there. And then in 20 years, you look back and you're like, holy shit, I need to go buy a yacht. Okay. That's what I'm talking about here. I do not recommend, I know people that you're going to lose so much headspace trying to game the system and day trade and all this other stuff, in my opinion. Okay. It's about time in the market, not about timing the market. That's a quote from Warren Buffett. So once again, we're going to talk about dollar cost averaging here in a little bit, but don't be like, okay, for example, Bitcoin's, you know, low, let me buy now. Bitcoin's high, let me sell now. The S&P lows, let me buy now. The S&P is high. But the idea here is that, you know, there's a study that shows that the person that, you know, in the past 40 years bought when it was the stock was at the lowest possible and sold when it was like at the highest possible. still performed less than the person that just dollar cost averaged the stock over 40 years, something like that. It's really interesting. But also, not only just that, but you don't want to be having this take up a lot of time, right? And that's what happens when you're trying to buy low, sell high, okay? So don't let fund managers manage your money, so you'll lose it to fees and their shitty performance. So this is really interesting. I was even talking to my CPA yesterday about this. So this was in 2019. Active fund managers trailed the S&P 500 for the 9th year in the row, okay? So that's when I talk about the S&P 500, which is pretty much just a conglomeration of the 500 strongest companies in the United States. These are some interesting stats. For the 9th consecutive year, the majority, 65% of large cap funds lagged the S&P 500 last year. After 10 years, 85% of large cap funds underperformed the S&P 500, and after 15 years, 92% are trailing. So when you hear your mom, your dad, somebody say, oh, I have someone managing my money, they're honestly not that smart, because number one, they do a shitty job managing the money. It is underperforming vastly than just the S&P 500, which it has zero fees and is simplistic. Okay, but what happens if you've seen the the movie Wolf of Wall Street? These people, they talk about keep them on the Ferris wheel. You know what I mean? We take the money out of our client's pocket and we put it in our pocket, and we never let them realize the gain. That's what money managers do. That is what they are incentivized to do. I don't use money managers. Okay, so they all are underperforming just the simple dollar cost averaging the S&P 500, which a child could do. And then they're still going to take what's known as 2 and 20 or 1.5 and 15, which means they're taking whether you win or lose, they're taking money of yours one way or the other. Okay. And on top of it, every 1% of fees that you're doing with your investment advisor could be about 25% of your wealth. Okay. Whenever you're retiring. So let's assume we pay an advisor 1% of investment for their services. That's a standard fee in the industry, although you can find less expensive and more expensive advisors. I think they're closer to 2% usually. The result is that on after fee basis, our return dropped from 9.7 to 8.7%. The result in a portfolio of just about 4.3 million, okay, compared to 5.8 million. So that 1% fee costs us about $1.5 million or 25% of the wealth to underperform. Imagine giving literally 25% of your wealth to somebody to do a shitty job, okay? And that is why I hate fund managers, okay? I'm sorry if you're a fund manager, but most people underperform the market. So that's why you also need to understand dollar cost averaging. So most people lose money because they invest emotionally, right? They're like, oh my God, the stock market's crashing. I need to pull out all my money now, right? Or, oh, the stock market's doing well. I need to put all my money in it now. That is very emotional. That just like business, you need to remove emotions from it. And that's why I like automatic investing, because I don't think about it and I just put it inside of, it just automatically pulls from my bank account and puts it into the, whatever the investment is. And all I do is I focus on making more money so it can pull more inside of there. Okay. So whether things are good or bad, it's just pulling out money. So that's why I like automatic investing. It's like, it's a robot. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to worry about it. Whether things are good, bad, you invest. Okay. Now, every once in a while, like in I think May, when the stock market dropped really heavy, the S&P 500 dropped really heavy because of everyone being fearful of coronavirus, I did put a lump sum of money into the S&P 500 because I was like, why not, right? I knew that was happening, but that still didn't affect any of my dollar cost averaging. I always say go forwards, never backwards. So when you do start the automatic investment journey, do not, in my unprofessional opinion, you don't want to like say you're like, oh, I love this. I love what Ravi said. I'm going to start doing $20,000 a month, and maybe you're making $25,000 a month. Okay, well then you have one bad month, and all of a sudden you got to go back in, you got to adjust the automatic investing, you got to change everything, and it's very demoralizing, and it also stops that kind of flow. So even back when I was doing, let's say $50,000 a month, I was still only investing like $5,000 a month. Then now I'm investing like close to $20,000 to $30,000 a month just in the S&P 500. So it'll increase over time, but you never want to go backwards. Okay, you should have it increase as your income increases as well. And then look for escape velocity. I kind of talked about this earlier. So the point at which your investments produce you enough cash that you don't ever need to work again. So this is kind of known as financial independence, but it's like, that once you have $3 million in the S&P 500 in about 40 years, that's going to be about $100 million. Okay, so that's like escape velocity at that point. You can do whatever the fuck you want to do then. Okay. And then finally, it isn't about moonshots, quantum leaps, kind of what we talk about inside the slide edge. It's about consistency on what's proven. Okay. So an example of this could be cryptocurrency versus the S&P 500. So cryptocurrency, if you understand enough of it, it doesn't seem like a moonshot if you're investing in the right coins. However, it's definitely riskier than just putting money into the S&P 500, which has been over 100 years it has produced 11% return on investment on average. Okay. So, and then the other example, which I'll get into later, would be like Bitcoin versus altcoins. So altcoins would be alternative coins, and then Bitcoin's like the mother lode. That's the one that everybody are going after. So you could put like, I have a few altcoins that I put like 20 grand into because there's a chance they might go up by 1,000% over the next 8 months. So that's a risk I'm willing to take, but that's like, 5%, maybe 3% of my Bitcoin portfolio. The majority of it is just dollar cost averaging something like Bitcoin. Okay. So that is the introduction to investing here, my friends. And next we're going to start talking about OPM and then exactly what I would invest in or what I am investing in. Thanks, guys.